A year ago, my husband woke from a coma with amnesia. I've been rebuilding us from scraps, photos taped into a binder, our song on repeat, ordinary rituals rehearsed like lines. Then, on a rainy Friday, a woman knocked with a little boy and a marriage certificate. "I'm his wife," she said. The boy called him Dad. My husband adjusted the kid's collar and said buddy like he'd done it 1,000 times. That was the moment I realized there was another life. Ours wasn't the only one. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from in the comments and hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story. My husband forgot me on a Tuesday. I don't mean he walked into a room and blinked like the hard drive hadn't spun up yet. I mean a truck found him on the wrong afternoon, and when he woke up 3 weeks later with a machine hissing winter into his throat, the only things he recognized were the smell of cinnamon and coffee and how to whistle with 2 fingers. He did not know my name. They call it retrograde amnesia, which sounds clinical and logical, and nothing like the way it feels when the person who knows where you keep the sugar and the spare toothbrush looks at you like a kind stranger and thanks you for adjusting his pillow. We did the checklist the neurologist gave me: photos, music, routines. We built a scaffolding out of ordinary and tried to wrap it around his brain like vines around a trellis and hope it held. I bought a 3-ring binder with a canvas cover and a pocket and began to call it what it was without believing in it: our life. I printed pictures of our apartment with Post-its pointing to the names of the rooms. This is the bedroom where you said, "We can repaint it if we hate it," even though we never did. I pasted the receipt from the diner in Vermont where we laughed until I cried because the waitress wrote Nolan plus Lena equals pancakes on the slip with a heart. I copied down the chorus of our wedding song because the neurologist said music sometimes gets past locked doors and into places language can't go. Every morning, I made coffee with a pinch of cinnamon because he said the smell lived in his head even when I didn't. Every afternoon, we walked to the corner where the maple lifts its roots like a toddler showing off its toes. And he would say, "What's that restaurant again?" And I would say, "The green one with the terrible chairs." And he would laugh, like he was borrowing the laugh of a man I used to live with and trying it on. Every night, I set an alarm for medication and one for brush your teeth, because amnesia doesn't care how old you are. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. We learned to let the failed parts be failed without deciding the whole thing was impossible. He remembered his preference for crunchy peanut butter. He remembered the exact right way to fold the dish towel so it would dry. He did not remember our argument about whether to visit my mother at Thanksgiving in the year I miscarried and did not want to be around anyone's gratitude. I refused to teach him that one. He also did not remember ever having a second phone. I found it in a box of things the hospital had labeled personal effects, and I put it in a drawer, because there are only so many doors that person can open in a day. People talk about care like it is noble. Sometimes it is. Other times it is a spreadsheet and a stain you don't notice on your sweatshirt until the bus driver does. I learned how to lift him without hurting both of us. I learned what volunteer organizations mean when they say respite and what they mean when they don't. I learned that grief has a schedule, and it is not yours. So when someone knocked on our door at 8:30 on a Friday night, and a woman with rain pinned to her hair stood there with a little boy in a dinosaur hoodie and a manila envelope and said, "I'm his wife," I had just finished labeling a photo of us in front of the lighthouse with our anniversary in neat black marker and was thinking about kissing him in that light, and wondered if his brain would think it was a new memory. The little boy's eyes were that suspicious blue children get when they have been told the world is safe and are currently considering evidence to the contrary. The woman's mouth held itself together the way a seam holds the dress you wore to the last party you went to before you realized you were done being 25. "I'm sorry to come like this," she said. Things have been... I didn't know how else." "Nolan?" I said, because manners are the most stubborn kind of habit. "This is..." He came into the hallway rubbing his shoulder where the therapist had said the scar tissue would complain for a while. "Hey," he said to the boy like his mouth had been borrowing that word all its life from men who knew what to do with a child's face. He reached out and straightened the boy's collar without thinking,
said Buddy under his breath in that voice that comes from a place farther back in the body than words. I felt it like you feel the floor shift when a subway passes under the street and you didn't know there was a tunnel there. The woman took a breath and handed me the envelope, because there is no way to make handing someone your marriage certificate feel like anything but an assault if they didn't know they were the other wife. I did not throw them out. That is the part of the story I am proud of. I said, "Come back tomorrow morning," and made 2 calls after they left. One to the neurologist to ask how to walk a man through a truth he didn't remember creating, and one to a lawyer who picked up on the second ring and said the sentence you always hope you will never need to hear from the mouth of someone who bills by the quarter hour. "I'm sorry, and we'll go slowly, and we'll check everything twice." I slept on the couch and pretended it was because I wanted to be near him if he dreamed badly. In the morning, we laid our lives on the table and tried not to flinch. Her name is Mara. The boy is Cole. Her certificate was dated 7 months before the accident. Mine, 4 years earlier than that. The courthouse clerk would later confirm that our divorce papers had been filed but never finalized. The ridiculous kind of administrative betrayal that turns you into the person you never wanted to be precisely when it matters that you are not that person. "Did you know?" I asked him. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to record his face when he said it. He shook his head and his eyes slid to the boy and then away like bodies do when they want to give themselves away. "I'm not going to remember anything that will help you," he said to me, as gently as medicine. "Not today." Mara placed 4 photos on the table, soft-framed images taken from the side. 3 of a man hand in hand with a child at a town fair, cropped to the chin, 1 of a hand with a wedding band, holding a paper cup with Mara written on it in green marker. The 4th photo was my husband's hand. It is a thing you know when you have put it to your face at night for years, when you have watched it chop vegetables and steady a luggage cart and flick the light off at the stove after you both have already left the kitchen. I went to the drawer and brought out the other phone. It was one of those cheap models you buy at airport kiosks when the credit card company decides to protect you without asking what devastation inconvenience causes. I turned it on. It trilled like it was surprised to be alive. The text thread with a number labeled Gabe, no last name, knew exactly where it had left off because time is a flat circle when you forget to tip it onto a shelf and make it into a box. Got her settled at Maple. Papers ready. Don't tell Lena until we close. You'll blow the sale. 2 calendars, man. Keep clean. I would have thrown the phone into the sink and turned the garbage disposal on if I hadn't needed it later to show a different kind of man who thought he was smarter than paper what paper can do. Instead, I slid the phone across the table like a little bomb and said, "And this?" and watched my husband shrink into a shape I did not recognize. Mara flinched like I had slapped her. "I'm not here to steal him," she said. "I did plenty of damage already without adding robbery to it. I'm here because our son's school needs paperwork and our lease needs a name that isn't a ghost, and when I looked up the county records, I realized I was married to a man who was still married to a woman who was sitting in my kitchen with a notebook that says, 'Our Life,' in neat letters, and a pen that doesn't shake." She put her ring on the table, the chain it had been hanging from coiling like a question. "And because Cole needs to be somebody's son out loud, not just in our house. We did the things you do when you lose the illusion that your life is coherent and decide to make it so anyway. We swabbed a cheek for DNA because I needed numbers, even if my heart already knew. We called a social worker because Mara left an ex who has bitten a hole in the word safety and needs the state to remember her name when she calls at night. We called a mediator because screams will not save a child from any of the people whose decisions he is at the mercy of. It rained that week like the sky was trying to get something of its own out of it. The DNA came back on a Tuesday with probability of paternity in black type and a percentage so high it made me dizzy for a different reason than I had been dizzy before. I put the printout in the binder next to the photograph of us in front of the lighthouse and felt the 2 pages heat where they touched, like stones do when you try to skip them and they sink anyway. The neurologist told me, calmly, that sometimes memory comes back in a flash because a smell bludgeons a neuron or a chord progression shoves open a door, and sometimes never. You can't force it, he said, but you can invite it. I turned the page in the binder to the wedding program and began reciting the names in the order they had stood in the church. He squinted like he was watching people walk through his living room and not remembering why they were there. I sang the chorus of our song the way you sing to a sleep child you would rather not wake. And he said, "I hear it," which is not the same as "I remember it," but sometimes you take what the door gives you. Cole changed the room for me before any adult did. Mara got caught in traffic in a storm the color of old disappointment. She was supposed to bring Cole over for an hour so my lawyer could give me papers and the mediator could give us homework. She texted me from a highway that had turned into a parking lot and wrote the sentence every mother writes to one of the only people who can help and still feel human. "I'm sorry to ask."
Stay, I told Cole when Mara turned him over to me at the door with her eyes on the morphing Doppler in her phone. The thunder is just the sky doing construction. It was a line I learned from my father when the barn would pop in July and I would go to the basement with my stuffed rabbit and the bag of canned peaches, like there's any war you can fight with syrup. Cole held the binder in 2 hands like it might bite him if he didn't show it respect. "What's that?" he asked. "It's a map for people who forget," I said. "What's that?" he asked again, and I don't know whether he meant the music, or the picture, or the person I was when I began the project. "Our song," I said. "It's about staying even when you lose the place you were." "The rain is loud," he said. "I can make a louder thing," I told him. I sang like a liar who wants very badly to have the truth assume control of the body. The power flickered and the thunder announced its daily bread, and he pressed himself into the space between my jaw and my shoulder, where you smell salt and hair and whatever the person you love had for lunch. Children breathe in a way that makes adults understand that breath is alone. He fell asleep on me like a man laying down a heavy thing. When his mouth slackened, he made a sound that would have broken me, even on a day when nothing else had. When he woke up, he handed me a drawing. Crayon. 3 figures with long legs standing in a lopsided line above a rectangle that I later learned was a dog who would never be allowed but who lived in his head anyway. He wrote C-O-L-E in green and L-E-N-A in red, because Mara had told him the letters of my name and he was the sort of boy who uses new skills immediately so they do not go cold. "For you," he said, "so you don't forget." The thunder broke something open that had not been adjacent to thunder. I had not had a child. I had told myself we would try after the accident, or after the lawsuit, or after the sale, or after we both stopped fighting about whose turn it was to forgive a thing we weren't planning to do to each other. I had watched other people's children and clapped for them, and gone home and taken my shoes off deliberately so I would feel the privilege of quiet on my feet. I looked at this boy with the eyes my husband had given him and the body I did not, and felt a weight shift onto my bones that made it easier to stand. Later, when we sat across from the lawyer, I put my ring in my pocket because it made my finger ache. We annulled the marriage to Mara because it had been illegal in a way that would make a judge sigh and write a 10-page opinion that included the word regrettably twice. We recognized Cole as Nolan's son because denying the biology would be a small cruelty in service of a larger pretense. We wrote down, on paper, that would end up in a beige filing cabinet and also in the daily life of a child, the words legal custody and parenting time, and child support and information sharing, with tables under them that would become a Google Calendar and a group text and a shoebox full of evidence that Promise has to wear clothes if it is to go out in public. We told Gabe to go to hell.
It took 2 letters from the company's board and 1 conversation with a man who had believed himself immune to consequence to make him realize his stake in our private lie had converted to a liability overnight.
Nolan began therapy because there are 2 kinds of apology. And "I'm sorry" without "I'm changing" is a kind way to say nothing. He handed me the passwords to everything, not as a gesture of surrender, but as a version of respect. He stopped arguing when I said I would like a separation that would not charm my mother if I told her about it, but that would let my body sleep in my bed without rehearsing a monologue for court. Mara updated the restraining order against her ex with a calm that tasted like magnesium. I drove her to the courthouse and sat while she signed, the pen scratching the paper with the same sullen sound mine had made 3 days prior. The judge circled a date with a fatigue you do not see if you haven't been in rooms like that. The school got a copy and filed it, and the secretary gave me the look she gives mothers when she cannot legally say, "We will keep this one extra safe," and must instead use the word protocol. Time, like pain, computes differently when you are keeping someone else alive. 10 minutes with a fever is an hour. 6 months with a schedule that you can follow in the dark but choose not to because that would be terrifying is 2 years. We made a life that did not include a man in my bed at night. We made a life that did include pancakes when Cole was with me on Saturdays and pictures in the Our Life binder under a tab I drew and labeled After. The tab looked ridiculous, and then it did not. I took Cole to the library and taught him how to help the pages turn. We practiced inside voices and how to put a book on its spine without breaking it. He figured out that if he leaned against my side at exactly the angle between my ribs and my hip, the book would stay open by itself and we could both be a little lazy together. At the first conference for kindergarten, I sat in a tiny chair in a classroom whose back wall had been decorated with paper leaves to keep the season cooperating with the lesson plan, and watched my husband try to fit his shoulders into the posture of a man who comes to teacher meetings and does not want to cry in front of a woman who has a purple pen clipped to her name tag. Afterward, in the parking lot, I put my hand on the roof of my car and said the sentence I had been cutting into smaller bites for weeks. "I'm not coming back." He did not argue. He did the thing he does when he is trying to act like he is bigger than the room he is in, which is to swallow. He nodded. He said, "I'm not asking you to, but if..." and then stopped. Whatever he had thought to ask was not something he could afford to request from the woman who had changed his bandages and also the entire shape of her life to let him survive the winter he had given her. We wrote down a list of things we would not do. We will not triangulate through the boy. We will not save any more our hardest truths for the inside of cars. We will not force a memory. We will not pretend there is one if there is not. We will not ask the other to be the person we were a year ago. Mara and I became the kind of people who sit together on bleachers while children run circles out of themselves in outdoor play, and who glance at each other in that quiet code that has nothing to do with the man who put us on a path we will be on until he dies, and then longer. Did you see that? Did you have enough coffee? Are you going to tell me if I have spinach in my teeth? She keeps snacks in her bag that she hands me without commentary. I answer her text at 1 a.m. saying, "He's feverish again," with a picture of 2 bottles of children's acetaminophen and drop in 5. There is no romance in this new house we have built out of things we did not want. There is routine, there is honesty, there is the boy who calls me Lena most days, and sometimes Auntie Lena, when he is sleepy and his mouth wants to be a little more generous, and his heart has not yet learned what it means to drown or to save itself. We went to the school festival in May, when all the paper leaves have turned into an attempt to convince children that pasting cotton ball to a picture of a sheep is thrilling. The lights flickered because public buildings are always apologizing for their budgets. 3 adults in a corner pulled out their phone flashlights at the same time and made a soft glow that did not make the kids think they were in danger. I stood there with Mara and the teacher.
all of us holding our phones up like candles at a vigil for a life we had saved on a Wednesday by making separate choices while in the same room. In my bag, the Our Life binder was heavier than it should have been, because paper is not just paper when it is overworked. I turned to the After tab and slid in a photo a parent had sent me by text. A boy in a cape in front of a face painting station, a woman on either side of him, both looking ridiculous and radiant and like they had not slept quite enough in the last half year. The kind you could hand to a judge and he would say, "I approve," even if he couldn't legally do that. On the drive home, Cole's hand was on my forearm from the back seat, the way children anchor themselves when seatbelts outrun the length of their arms. He said, "The thunder was like construction again." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I didn't mind." And I said, "I saw." And then he said, "Thank you for the song." And I said nothing for a second, because adults are supposed to cry privately. And then I said, "Anytime." They will tell you you have to forgive to be happy. They will say it like a dare, or a curse, or a trick to get you to be less complicated so they can be comfortable. I do not forgive him. That is a story I do not need to tell for us to keep this house. I forgive myself for failing to notice that people who love you are still capable of being the worst version of themselves when they are trying to be a different person. I forgive the part of me that wanted to make the boy pay for either of our sins and did not. I forgive, notices the wrong kind of work, and hands it a sandwich. When it rains now, I still sing. Sometimes no one is there to hear me. Sometimes a boy presses his face into the space where I am soft and breathes like a typewriter returning the carriage. Sometimes the man who forgot me will stand in a doorway and watch me be the person he asked me to be without saying the word again. I have become very good at loving a person I did not meet through a man I do not sleep with anymore. There is the life we thought we were living, then there is this one. We chose this one on purpose.